Warren Buffett's 2002 shareholder letter is honestly a masterclass, and today it's more relevant than ever. So we're going to dig in and pull out the actionable principles, the real playbook that you can actually use. This isn't just theory, it's a deep dive into capital allocation and, just as importantly, risk management.
Okay, let's just start with the numbers because they really speak for themselves. I mean, an average annual gain that more than doubles the S&P 500, that's incredible. But the real story, the mind-blowing number, is that overall gain, 214,000%. Look, that kind of outperformance doesn't happen just by picking a few good stocks. It points to something deeper, a structural advantage. So that begs the question.
How on earth is a return like that even possible? Well, the answer isn't just in the investments Berkshire makes, but in the unique economic engine that fuels the whole operation. And for Berkshire Hathaway, that engine has a name: insurance flow. Look, if you want to understand how Berkshire works, you have to understand float. It is the absolute heart of the model. It's the main source of the capital that Buffett and Munger get to deploy. And what makes it so amazing isn't just the sheer size of it, but its cost.
Buffett's definition is just genius in its simplicity. Money we hold but don't own. Think about that. This is all the cash from insurance premiums that Berkshire collects up front. They then get to invest that money for their own benefit, sometimes for decades, before any claims actually have to be paid out. It's like having a massive, long-term, interest-free loan from your policyholders.
And this structure creates this incredibly powerful flywheel. You collect the premiums, you invest that giant pile of cash, and you pay out the valid claims much, much later. The whole game is just to make sure that your investment returns on that float are higher than any underwriting losses you might have. Simple, right? By the end of 2002, this float had ballooned to over $41 billion. That is an insane amount of capital to work with. But here's the kicker, the most important part. It's the cost of that capital. In 2002, it cost them only 1%. In some years, the cost was actually negative. They were literally being paid to hold and invest billions of dollars. That is an advantage that is almost impossible to compete with. All right, so you've got this massive, practically free pool of capital. Now what? What's the playbook for actually putting it to work? Well, that brings us right to their acquisition strategy. This quote right here gets to the core of it. This is what makes Berkshire so different from your typical private equity shop. They're not thinking about the exit. They're not looking to flip a company in 5 to 7 years. They buy to keep. And when permanent ownership is your mindset, it totally changes how you value a business and how you deal with its management. And a huge part of that buy-to-keep philosophy is betting on people. Buffett uses this great analogy about Eddie the Bat Boy. The idea is simple. Find people who are already winners, who run fantastic businesses, and then get out of their way. You partner with them and let them keep doing what they do best. But Buffett's playbook isn't just about playing offense. It's just as much, maybe even more, about playing defense, about avoiding those huge, catastrophic mistakes. And in this letter, back in 2002, he sounded a massive alarm bell about a risk that was just quietly building up under the surface of the entire financial system. And there it is, the famous quote. Now, remember, this was written in early 2003. That's a full 6 years before the global financial crisis. He wasn't just pointing out a bad investment. He saw a systemic threat, something so dangerous he called them financial weapons of mass destruction. He really zeroed in on the accounting problem. He saw how these valuations were drifting further and further from reality. Mark to market is based on real prices. Mark to model starts using internal assumptions. But then he coined this brilliant term, mark to myth, for when those models are just used to cook the books and create completely fictional profits. He then lays out exactly why they're so dangerous. First, you have these powerful incentives for traders and CEOs to use mark-to-myth accounting to juice their bonuses. Second, there's the pile-on effect, where a simple credit downgrade can trigger a flood of collateral calls and bankrupt a company overnight. And third, the daisy chain risk, where one company's failure pulls everyone else down with it. I mean, this is a perfect description of what happened in 2008. And all this thinking about risk flows directly into his next big theme. You can't just analyze the spreadsheet. You have to analyze the people and the culture behind the spreadsheet. This, for him, is the ultimate acid test. This is one of his all-time great lines. The point is, those little accounting games you see, They are rarely just isolated mistakes. More often than not, they're the one thing you can see that points to a much bigger, hidden problem with the company's integrity. So this leads him to a really practical checklist for due diligence. First, weak accounting, like not expensing stock options, is a huge red flag. Second, if you can't understand the footnotes, it's probably because management doesn't want you to. And third, if a company is obsessed with hitting quarterly projections, you should be very, very suspicious. It's a fantastic framework for judging the quality of management. So we've got the engine, the acquisition strategy, and the defensive framework. But none of it works without this last piece, having the right temperament. And honestly, this is probably the hardest discipline for any of us to master. He starts out by making it clear. Berkshire loves owning businesses. They love stocks. This isn't about being a pessimist who's always sitting in cash. But everything, and I mean everything, depends on that little clause at the end. If they can be purchased at attractive prices. And he even gives us a number, a hurdle rate, a high probability of at least a 10% pre-tax return. If you can't find that, the default action is to do nothing, to just sit on the sidelines. Now, that is a really profound idea because it flies in the face of the entire industry's bias for action, that constant pressure to always be doing something. Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. Buffett's 2002 letter gave us a timeless playbook, right? It's built on a powerful capital engine, a long-term owner's mindset, and a deep, healthy fear of systemic risk. But maybe the most powerful lesson of all is about temperament. In a world that rewards speed and constant activity, maybe the single greatest competitive advantage is having the discipline to simply do nothing and wait.